high wore off, and I was like, oh Jesus, I, I could have walked out of there with 100,000.
How have you been spending the summer?
Well, I took a week trip to the East Coast, New York City and Massachusetts and Connecticut, and then a week recovering. So that's been my whole break. One trip, 1 week on the couch.
How long have you lived in Oregon now?
Um, on the 15th of July, it will be 2 full years.
How are you adjusting? How's that been?
It's been great. I love it out here. I love it out here. I love the city of Portland. It's it's small, but it has everything that we need: art and good shopping and good restaurants and bars and um, really lovely people. And um, the air is pretty clean, which was a big reason for leaving New York.
Yeah.
And I love where I'm working, and I've made a lot of nice, wonderful friends. And
You thought the air quality is bad before you left. Try getting Canadian wildfires wafted down onto you. That was,
yeah, yeah, no, that's trash. No, that was really
yeah,
trash. It was like a week before I got there. It was like, blow, get it out of there so I
it,
can.
it was, it's the worst air quality I've ever seen in the city. It was,
Yeah,
it
no,
was
that was
pretty,
really bad.
pretty crazy. Yeah.
Hmm.
So I wonder if we could back up. Um, I'm curious about your early life because I've known you for like 15 or so-ish years, but I know
Hmm.
very little about uh before then. I saw that you had gone to Cornell. I didn't know that. And so I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about your upbringing, your early life, what led you to Cornell? What was that like?
Yeah. So my parents both went to Cornell and met there. And I was actually born in Ithaca when my mom
Oh
was a
wow.
junior. Yeah. My dad had just graduated. My mom was a junior. Um, and so the first 6 months of my life were basically on campus. Um, and all of my mom's best friends were Cornellians. So I was kind of
Hmm.
raised by all of these men and women from Cornell who um, I'm still close with a bunch of them
Hmm.
today. Um, the um, I grew up in Brooklyn mostly and went to 4-H all through middle school. And the person who ran my 4-H club was one of my mom's best friends from Cornell and worked for Cornell. So it's like this constant like loop back my whole life. Um,
I'm sorry, 4-H?
4-H is like it's like a kids program, kind of like um Boy Scouts, but less dogmatic, I guess. So you join a group, a club, and you learn a curriculum that's seasonal. So upstate New York and a lot of farming communities around the country focus their 4-H curriculum on raising livestock or doing sort of agriculture.
Hmm.
And the Cornell Extension, which runs Cornell in the city, does a version that's more focused on like light gardening and um, tree conservation in parks and nutrition. And we learned woodworking and like made paper napkin holders and things like that in my mom's friend's dining room. And we would learn public speaking. And every year there would be a chance for us to participate in the state fair in Rockland County. And then we would also go up to Cornell for the 4-H Congress, which was like all of the 4-H clubs from around New York State would meet up, and we'd have like model UN type things and speaking contests and just meet kids from around the state. And so I did the Congress twice, And that was on campus, and I was like, oh my God, it's like being home again, even though I didn't remember anything. But I loved it so much that when I was applying for college, I was like, yeah, I gotta do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was your experience there like? What, I mean, yeah, presumably you had heard so many stories, and did it match your expectations going in? Was it?
Yeah, it did. So I spent 4 years in boarding school for high school, at a medium-sized school in Connecticut, and right outside of Hartford. And it was rough. It was rough. Like coming from Brooklyn, where I had been in a really excellent middle school, with that was all Black and brown kids, to go to a predominantly white school in Connecticut was really tough. And I had like one amazing year and then 3 years of what the hell am I doing? So when I was applying for colleges, my main interest was to find a college where I could be unapologetically Black
Hmm.
and be politically active, and be in a Black community and sort of um, do a little healing. Um, and my first choice was actually Spelman College in Atlanta, and I got in, but the financial aid package wasn't good enough. And so Cornell was my second choice because my parents had been very politically active, and they had helped to create a residential college. It was like a dorm with a curriculum, called Ujima Residential College. And it was um, sort of a hotbed of political action and activism all through the 70s and 80s. Um, and so I was like, well, if I can't go to Spelman, or another historically Black college, and honestly, I didn't apply to any others, but then I want to go to a large public university that has a large community of Black people where I can be political. So when I got there, we were in it right away.
And this
My
is
first,
91?
yeah,
Yeah.
nice. Yeah, so my first year, um, I think it was my first or second year, um, Rodney King, the verdict came out, and so there were huge protests on campus about that. We were ready to set fire to buildings. We were having like these massive hour-long rallies and conversations until all hours of the night, which I loved. Clarence Thomas's confirmation hearings happened in those first couple of years. And so there were a lot of really interesting conversations about Anita Hill's accusations, a really big split between Black men and Black women over whether we should support Clarence Thomas as a nominee because he was a Black man, even if Anita Hill's accusations had real currency. Um, we did not resolve that particular split, and history has come down on our side. But um, the fact that we could be in those conversations like constantly in between classes was amazing. And then it was also stuff like, staying up all night waiting for Michael Jackson's new video to drop. BET, or every Sunday or every Thursday night getting together to watch The Cosby Show in a different world, and like, just like having a community of people who were like me and from places, where I grew up. Like some of my middle school friends were in my freshman year class. So um, it was a really nice way to sort of recover from 4 years of boarding school and also give myself exactly the kind of political activism that I wanted, plus an incredible education.
Hmm. And you studied English.
I did. My plan was to be a boarding school teacher.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so that I could be the person I needed when I was a student and didn't have. In retrospect, I kind of did have that person. I just didn't realize it at the time, but I wanted
Hmm.
more of those people. So I was like, I'm gonna go be one of those people because what the hell?
When you say in retrospect, you had one of those people.
Yeah, there was a teacher who came my junior year, um, in the English department. I never had her as a teacher, but she would um, lead some of the community service groups that I was a part of. She helped organize a bunch of us to do a performance of Langston Hughes's poems at a
Mm.
Hartford elementary school. And she put together this whole program and directed us and drove us back and forth for rehearsals. We worked with a community organization. And she was a Black woman who was um, very interested in us and in our lives and how we were doing. But because I didn't have her as a teacher and only had limited, experience with her through this one activity, I didn't have the bond with her that I wanted and probably needed to confide in her about how hard it was to be a student at the school. And I wound up instead bonding with other teachers and um, the school psychologist and wishing that they were Black so that, I could have a deeper level conversation with them. Um, but she was a wonderful person. She was a really, really smart, caring person that I just didn't know at the time how good a support she might have been.
Mm. And when you just you say that you had it in your mind to be a boarding school teacher, was that the extent, or was it I want to be a boarding school teacher who teaches English?
I wanted to be a boarding school teacher who taught English and coached and counseled and all of that. I I sort of always loved to read. Um, I was this sort of weirdo kid who, if you took me to a party, I would be in a corner with a book. Um, I would read walking down the block on the way to the bus and back.
The old
Um,
school texting and
yeah,
walking.
yeah, exactly. I
You see
had
it now and again still,
You do,
but
and
much less frequently.
I don't have the peripheral vision I used to back in those days,
Yeah.
um, but I read all the time, and I had very influential English teachers in high school, and I just thought, well, that's a really good balance. My other career goal had been to be a child psychologist, um, but I wanted to, I don't know, I think I wanted to have my hands in a few other areas, other than just counseling. Um, and I appreciated how fully boarding schools surround students. Um,
Mm.
when a kid goes away to boarding school, they will spend more time with those teachers than they ever will with their parents ever again. Um, and that level of responsibility and contact time seemed like a really vital and useful way to help support kids. So,
Yeah, if you are a boarding school teacher, you are sort of a de facto child psychologist.
yeah, yeah.
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 Um, Interesting. So, how was the transition out of Cornell into the workforce?
It was good. It was good. I think probably because I went to boarding school and then started working at a boarding school right out of college, I was, institutionalized, as it were. Like I had this sort of, my whole life was sort of shaped by a school calendar. So I understood how to maneuver in that world and through with those expectations pretty easily, pretty quickly. I was kind of an arrogant schmuck my first couple of years. Like I just showed up like, I know everything and you're doing it all wrong. Um, which was really incorrect because I didn't have any experience teaching. I had had one class in college. There were no certification classes for English teachers at Cornell, only for math and science. So I could only take classes on the side for learning how to teach. And I took one class and got one semester of practical application. And it was really in a tutoring situation, not even in a classroom. And then I had a summer job right out of Cornell that gave me classroom experience for about 6 weeks. So then I jumped into a classroom. Like I had no problem teaching the way I was taught, which was mostly actually pretty bad. So it was a pretty steep learning curve, and it took me a while to even realize how much I didn't know. But I loved working with kids right away. I loved my colleagues. I was at a school in New Jersey that was just close enough to home, to my mom down in DC and my dad up in New York and my other relatives up in New York, that I could get, you know, all the home comforts I needed, but also far enough away that I could feel like an adult right away. And so, with just the bachelor's, I was able to sort of launch myself, and I loved it.
That's great. Yeah. When you say that some of or the ways that you had been taught to teach were bad, what experiences made you come to that realization?
Um, One of the things that was really missing for the entirety of my high school career was instruction in grammar and vocabulary acquisition. And so all the things that I was taught about how to write were really about style and sometimes
Hmm.
about structure. And it turns out it's really hard to help kids understand when their writing is good or not good if you don't give them instruction on how to put a sentence together, or how to use language, which is something I still struggle with today. I'm a department chair now, and we don't have a good grammar and vocabulary curriculum. And I've got 12th graders, and I'm like, seriously, yo, what are these sentences? What is happening? And private schools are really actually pretty bad at doing that consistently. And I was bad at it because I hadn't been taught it. And so I had to learn a lot to get good at doing that, helping kids understand language. Um, I also for 4 years, had a very Eurocentric curriculum. And when you, what the classes that I was teaching were more diverse than the ones I had been in. And I wasn't prepared really I wasn't adequately prepared to talk about some of the material that we had and how it was going to land on different kinds of kids. Um, Never really, none of my teachers ever really thought about that stuff. And so I didn't have the background for parsing out. If you're teaching Huckleberry Finn, these 3 Black kids in this room are going to have a very different experience from the 15 white kids in this room. And the language is going to be a real barrier. And, and this is back in a time, in the 90s, and we were using the N word freely whenever we read from the book. Um, and and I would notice, I was like, oh, we're making terrible choices right now. This is a terrible choice. But I didn't have the language or the experience to know how to talk to my team or my department head about how to make those adjustments. So, I got Booker T. Washington's book, Up from Slavery, removed from the curriculum my first year. We taught it my first year, and it's like, no, never again. No, because it was being taught to 10th graders who hadn't had American history yet. I was like,
Yeah.
they don't understand why this is really problematic. And you're teaching it like it's excellent material for everybody to read. But Booker T. Washington was controversial even in his day. And we can't keep teaching this book. I had a much harder time with other texts because I just didn't have the experience in the language.
Did you teach a course at one point called Gods and Monsters
Yeah,
as an elective? What was that
yeah.
about?
that class was one of my favorite classes to teach, and I took a lot of things from it, but it was a 12th grade elective at my last school that focused on classical Roman and Greek mythology. Um, a little bit took a little bit from Hinduism and from um, some of the other Vedic faiths like Jainism and what was the other one we looked at? I can't remember. But then we look at the Bible and talk about the Abrahamic faiths, and then use that material as a way of giving the kids enough to create their own worlds. So I would break every class up into two or three groups, and they had to build a world
Hmm.
and then build the gods that the people in that world worshipped. And then they had to create a calendar of rituals. And at the end of the semester, they would present stories about their gods to introduce the rituals, and then have the class like enact at least one of the rituals that like anything that didn't involve fire or sacrifice.
Sure.
But they would do things like build these elaborate shrines, or I had one kid who created stained glass windows with tracing paper and colored pencils. Or there was the year that we had like a it was like a gladiator game kind of situation. We had to like choose the god that we were cheering for, and all kinds of things. And it was a lot of fun. But it was also a way to give the students some agency, at the end of
Hmm.
their senior year. Nobody was reading a book. I couldn't get anybody to read a book. So we watch a lot of movies. You watch The Matrix and Avengers: Age of Ultron, and use the course to activate their imagination and let them play, but also give them some material to think about popular culture in a way that was a little bit more grounded in, the foundation of myths and legends.
Sounds like a great course.
It was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. Do you subscribe to the, I mean, it's kind of trite, but you learn what you teach, or you learn more when you teach something.
Yeah, I think that it's true in a number of ways. I think in order to teach effectively, you have to constantly be studying.
Hmm.
So teachers are lifelong learners because every time you pick up a new book to teach it, you have to really get into um, what's informed the authorship of the piece. You have to get into the time period that the book is set in, and also the time period it was written in. So what's the audience that this author is trying to communicate to? Um, Plus, you also have to continue to keep your eye on what people understand about how the brain works, how learning happens,
Hmm.
um, so that you stay effective. Um, I had some really, really great innovations brought to me just this past year that were so game changing in terms of how to use a class period to really effectively make a lesson sticky, and
Hmm.
also keep students' engagement high. Um, and all of it is built on research that I had seen in other places at other times, but was put together at a whole new level and was super effective. So yeah, if you're not constantly reading and scanning the landscape for new material, you are not going to be an effective teacher.
Hmm.
I know plenty of teachers who have taught the same class for decades, given the same assignments, given the same assessments, and they got it in the can and they're just trying to ride it out so they can retire. Um, and people like them, but that doesn't mean that they're very good at what they do. Um, they just get by and nobody's hurt by what they do, hopefully, most of the time. but I can't
Except
imagine
for
that they
themselves, maybe. It sounds boring to
it
some,
does sound boring, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But um, I mean, I've certainly been in the situations where I used to teach The Great Gatsby every year. I taught it every year for the first 25 years of my career, and sometimes more than once a year. And there were 2 pages in The Great Gatsby that I knew by heart, and those 2 pages had lesson plans that went with them that I did every year for easily a solid decade. And you could not have shaken me off of those 2 lesson plans. They were like my bread and butter. I waited all year for those 2 classes. Everything led up to that. And so I get how you can wind up with something in a can. You're like, yeah, just
Yeah.
shake it up, spray it. But there isn't there isn't a lot of room for that.
Hmm. Okay, there are two things I want to ask about.
Mm.
First of all, you brought up the term lifelong learner,
Mhm.
which is a great term, and I'm curious uh, how you yourself sort of make that happen. It's not it you have to make a dedicated effort to be a lifelong learner, and I'm curious how you make that happen in your life. And two, I'm curious about what specific practices or technologies you learned about that actually made those lesson plans sticky.
Yeah.
Um,
Um, so one of the things that I do to keep myself learning and keep things fresh. I don't even know how conscious it is, but um, I have a subscription to the New York Times through my school. They pay for it, so I don't have to give them my money, which is really nice because I fight with the New York Times a lot. But um, what that means is that I have this constant feed of really interesting journalism coming into my mailbox every day. And I think I have the kind of curiosity and natural curiosity where if you tell me something interesting, I want to know more. Um, I want to sort of follow the trail beyond the edge of the article. um and that combination of like having things that come to me passively and pursuing things actively just because I'm curious, I think keep information fresh for me, you know um and help me learn things regularly. I think the other passive part of it is just being surrounded by interesting people who are always asking good questions and finding good material. Not every interesting person I know does this. Unfortunately, there are a lot of very smart, very interesting people who sort of um, hold on to their nuggets like squirrels. They're like, "Oh, I got this," and then nobody else needs to know. But I do know a lot of people who love to just talk about things that they've discovered and share that. And then, if somebody smart says, "Ooh, you should read this," you're going to read that. You should read that, and then try it out. And that's what led me, to your second question, to this innovation. One of the new faculty members in my department sent me an article that I opened and then didn't read for like a week. And he mentioned it in a faculty meeting. And I was like, oh yeah, that's embarrassing. So I read through it at the start of a class period while the kids were journaling. And what it said was, if you want to really engage every member of a class, small group discussions are very effective for a limited kind of kid, right? The kid who's good at talking and taking things in verbally. But for all kinds of kids, a small group on its feet can take on a task and a problem and work together in a way that will boost all the members of that group's attention and focus, and then help all of them practice what it is that they're working on. So you give them a question or a quotation. You give them a section of the whiteboard or a sheet of easel paper on the wall. If you've got a bulletin board, you can tack it up. If you don't, you can tape it up, and a bunch of markers. Ideally, there's a marker for each kid, which for some reason I never have enough markers. But that means that everybody has the opportunity to mark up whatever it is you're working on, and you write or have them write the thing that they're working on the board or on the piece of paper, so it's right there in front of them. And I found that for an English class, it's especially effective to give them a quotation and then a little direction around what to do with the quotation. Um, then they have this job to do, right? They have to answer a question looking at this quotation, or they have to apply the quotation to something we've discussed earlier. They have something they have to figure out, and they have to do it on their feet at the board or on the wall. The researcher who crafted this particular technique said that it's the physical movement of writing on a vertical surface as opposed to a horizontal one, which is incredibly difficult to do if you're sitting at a table, right? Like if you have four kids around a table, not everybody is oriented the same way, so not everybody is gonna want to write on that, because not everybody can read when anybody could write. On a vertical surface, everybody can read when anybody writes, right? So that's number one. Number two, because they're moving, they're less likely to sort of lose focus and check out. And because you all have easy access to the problem in front of you, everybody feels responsible for actually solving it.
Interesting.
And I was like, that's so simple, but it sounds like it might work. But I tell you, I mean, I could have just given them nursery rhymes and handed them a bunch of markers and put this stuff up on the wall. It was amazing, because for easily 35 minutes, which in a classroom is a really long time, they were all at work in their various corners of the room, um, and all took ownership of it afterward when we went around and reviewed everybody else's work. And we did that like on a gallery walk. We went from one pocket to the next and talked through what each group had done. And everybody was invested in that. Of course they were, like, so it was all the things that I've always considered, like, making the work active and literally putting it on its feet. Done that before. Gallery walks are very effective, but usually it's a lot of sort of piddly little things. It's sticky notes, or God, teachers love sticky notes these days. Or it's like lots of prep at the table and then you put it up. But by cutting the table out, it just the speed and the engagement was so much better. And so it was, the other thing that I've learned over time is that students really have to construct their own understanding of material, which is, again, not something I learned from the way I was taught. We had what we call the sage on the stage pretty often. Really charismatic, smart teacher telling you what to think about stuff. And we don't do that anymore, but it's not always clear what the best ways are to get kids to construct their understanding of things. And that's in my toolkit forever. It is massively effective and super simple.
I wonder if you could just speak to, sort of at a higher level, what, in your opinion, makes a good teacher?
Compassion. First, you actually have to care about kids in general, and then be able to focus in on individual kids and give them your eagle eye. Not all the time. Um, some of them will really shy away from that kind of attention, and they're probably, God willing, getting it from somebody else, if they are rejecting it from you. But you have to care enough to at least even notice that. Kids don't learn well from people they think don't care about them. Um, and you're less likely to craft lessons and assessments that are responsive to their needs if you don't care about them. Like if your only focus is on the material, and not on how the kids are learning the material, it's an uphill battle. One of the things I really resist about bringing APs into any curriculum is that the focus is so heavily on the material and on the test and on how to take the test that it really leaves very little room for the kids. And they have to come first. They have to be the most interesting subject in the room. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that you have to actually care about and know about your subject matter. If you don't like what you're teaching, if you don't know enough about it, it is crystal clear to the kids, and nothing you design is ever really going to be very effective. um, you can't adequately assess how much progress a kid is making if you don't know what that means, and if you don't have a sense of what the low end looks like and what the high end can look like. So you've got to know your subject matter. You have to know how to be able to break that down into pieces so that you can instruct on how to achieve growth. Um, and while I said that the sage on the stage model is gone and a lot of it is constructive, you still have to be able to instruct at times, right? So like I was saying before about grammar and vocabulary, none of that is innate. Language acquisition is not innate, um, in terms of its construction, right? Like you can learn by ear, but you won't necessarily be able to construct unless you understand the pieces and how things are put together. So, to your earlier question about lifelong learning, I've been doing Duolingo now for about 1,000 days, practicing French. I have been studying French since 2001. I cannot speak French. I, I can't speak it. I understand a little bit when I hear it, but not when it's spoken by a native speaker. I can't watch a French movie without subtitles. I've been studying this language for 22 years, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that Duolingo, for all of its effectiveness as a teaching tool, doesn't do a great job of breaking down the mechanics of sentence construction. So, and it doesn't require me to practice things at a certain level. I repeat things into a microphone when I'm doing a lesson, and it will tell me whether or not I got the pronunciations of things right. But it won't put me into a conversation and then give me feedback on what I got wrong, right?
Yeah.
So basically, it's a video game that I enjoy.
Right. Right.
And so a good teacher has to know how to do all of those things so that a kid can actually learn how to put a sentence together and how to understand what they're reading when they pick up a new book.
It strikes
And
me that no, yeah, that's really interesting. And I've had the same experience with Duolingo, that it's very good at teaching you sort of audio skills that have to do with the language, but at any level of resolution deeper than that, a la syntactical at the level of a sentence, or even at the level of a word with like conjugation, it gets a lot more iffy. And then your point about it'd be nice if it doesn't put you in conversation and then give you feedback makes me wonder, maybe at some point AI will merge with language acquisition tools to the point where you can have a free-flowing conversation and then it'll analyze and give you feedback on it.
Yeah.
That's interesting. You mentioned about having concerns about um, bringing the AP on board, and now you're teaching at the school in Oregon, and you are the English department chair. And I have a couple of questions. First of all, I want to ask about sort of the difference in working in sort of the administrative side of academia versus being a teacher. And second, sort of for my own for my own concern about, it seems like there is just more and more testing, and I kind of worry it's easy to be to not, not to be fatalistic, but just to say, where does it stop? I read an article recently. There's 300% more homework, and kids are just being, taught to the test as opposed to the material. Um, do you see any? Is it just an intractable problem that there's a growing volume of people that need to be assessed, and so the assessment tools are just going to get more and more plentiful, and um I don't know. Where how do you see that problem?
Yeah, so it is an intractable problem, and it's not because of the volume of students, which is pretty
Hmm.
steady actually. School age student, the school age student population has been pretty remarkably steady
Hmm.
for the last decade or so, even as the testing has gone up. We had a drop in school age student population after lockdown. It
Hmm.
hasn't quite risen back to its normal levels because kids just disappeared, which is another issue. But the reason it's intractable, in my opinion, is because somebody's making money. None of this
Hmm.
testing has anything to do with pedagogy. It doesn't have anything to do with the actual effectiveness of testing on learning. There's no evidence that testing, the way that we test, actually increases learning. Now, quizzing, the sort of short-term retrieval practice, actually
Hmm.
does have some impact on learning. But the way that these tests are designed and the way that teachers are being guided to teach these tests is not about learning.
Right.
It's just about taking these tests, and these tests cost money. Somebody is making a lot of money, and the because we are a competitive world, and a super competitive nation, we the push to more public school testing came on the heels of this reckoning with how we stacked up against other countries, right?
Yeah.
So our math and science scores were coming in lower than virtually anybody in the developed world. And people were like, oh, hell no. We're coming in behind China and Canada? No, absolutely not. Can't ever happen. Um, so instead of immediately saying what is happening in our schools, public or private, that is keeping us from being competitive in these ways. And the question was never whether we should be competitive, but what it was getting in the way. Nutrition, for example. If your kids are starving, they're not learning. If your kids aren't sleeping and aren't safe, they're not learning. If they don't feel like anybody cares about them because they're in a class with 39 other kids and nobody knows their name, they're not learning. But nobody ever bothered to consider those three very basic survival issues that would have helped boost learning in
Hmm.
classrooms. Instead, a company showed up, went to the Secretary of Education and said, I can sell you this package. I can sell
Hmm.
you No Child Left Behind. I can sell you, Race to the Top. I can sell you whatever the package is. And if you buy this package, you will see your numbers increase. Well, of course, if I give you a test and I tell you how to teach to that test, then those numbers will get better successively year over year because what I'm teaching is training, right? I'm training kids to perform at a level that we can recognize because it's a one-to-one. If I teach you how to throw a ball and you actually manage to throw the ball, then I've taught you how to throw the ball. Doesn't mean I've taught you baseball, but or I haven't improved your
Mm.
manual dexterity in any other way, but I got you to throw that ball.
Mm.
And
In the
God,
same way that
no,
Duolingo is a video game and not a language acquisition tool.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And so the AP is another great example, and the SATs are, and ACT. Those are all great examples of packaged products that require, in order to do well at the SAT, you have to take the SAT a lot of times. You have to study how to approach the test and recognize the questions, right? Which means you have to buy the products that teach you how to respond and how to recognize. All of that is making somebody very, very wealthy.
Mm.
These are publicly traded companies that are that have figured out what the cash cow is, right? And it is never going to stop because we are capitalist to the core. And as long as somebody is making money, they're never going to give up whatever that market is. Those
Mm.
lobbyists are going to be in the Secretary of Education's office every single day. They're always going to have a new pocket. Oh, this didn't work? Don't worry. We got this one over here.
Mm-hmm.
If you didn't like a cherry flavor, wait till you try grape.
Yeah.
And public education is rife for that level of corruption because it's, as we know from lockdown, it is where all of the children have to go if they don't have the money to do anything else.
Mm.
And so that's why you don't find any of those curricula in private schools because they don't need them and they don't want them and they don't have to have them. Those kids are going to be fine and they're going to get just enough instruction in whatever it is to send them on to whatever college or university they can dream of. But in public school, that captive audience is absolutely being milked for the most amount of money to corporations who don't give anything back to those kids, certainly not in education.
Mm. Ooh, that's depressing.
Yeah, no, no, I'm incredibly cynical about it, um,
Yeah.
but I believe it. I
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. Um, can you distinguish for me the prepackaged programs and the testing implements? Because private schools still teach the SAT.
Mhm.
You know, as many colleges that are going to waive standardized tests, a lot of them still, have them.
Yep.
Um, you know, do you see that is hmm, the monetary incentives are deeply entrenched and those aren't going anywhere. But to give the devil its due, you still need a way to assess students. Do you
Yeah.
see any, how would you propose to test students? Is there any way to test students that can work within those deeply entrenched monetary incentives that is also better for the students?
So the in order to answer your question, I think you need to ask what the testing is for, um, and who is it serving. Um, like, what's the goal on the other side of it, right? Um, the SAT and the ACT were created by the institutions that they serve. They were created by those universities, right, as a gatekeeping mechanism. Um, when when admissions became more open and it wasn't simply a matter of Princeton pulling its selected students from the prep schools, in its area, or Harvard pulling its selected students from the prep schools in its area, and they started to actually begin to open the doors to more kinds of applicants, they needed to put some sort of gate in place, and the SAT and the ACT were really useful ways of doing that. The research is definitive that the best indicator of success in college is your transcript, not your SAT scores or your ACT scores. There is no correlation between how well you do on those standardized tests and how well you do over 4 years, or if you complete a degree in 4 years in a college or university, or in those other programs in like engineering schools are generally 5 years. There's no that they don't talk to each other. Those two metrics do not talk to each other. So the idea that the SAT and the ACT are ways of distinguishing the students who are likely to be best suited to a school are solely about figuring out who has access to the prep programs and the textbooks and the tutors. And the people who were most likely to have been fast tracked into those colleges and universities anyway also have the access. They also have the money.
The same people, right?
The same people, because that's the system, right? It was set up so that the people who normally would have walked through the doors without the gate, when the gate was put in place, they still had to get there fast track. The other question then is, okay, so what else are these tests for? What else are they meant to measure? And going back to that competitiveness question, I swear to God, I don't even know why we were trying to figure out where we stood compared to other industrialized nations in terms of our educational attainment. But if we're going to put ourselves in some sort of academic Olympics every few years, then yeah. If that gets us a grant from the UN, I don't know, like, what is it for? Is it just bragging rights? Then yeah, you need to be able to put the whole pool of school-age students together and figure out across the country, 50 statewide, plus your territories, who knows what and how well they can do what. And in that sense, yeah, you're going to need something to figure that out. But again, what's it for? Does it get us a boost in trade talks? Does it help us, get a leg up when we're trying to figure out who's going to Mars faster? I don't know. Between those two poles, right, there are those kids who are never going to go to college, don't want to, don't need to, and really aren't suited for it. Their testing is used to determine whether or not their teachers get paid a living wage.
Oh, right. Interesting.
Whether their schools get the funding they need to get the lights on and the doors open. And whether or not they get the newest innovative material, right? Do they get new textbooks? Do they get new Chromebooks? Do they get, simulcast in the gym, whatever. So in that sense, somebody's got to figure out a better metric for determining funding, because it should never be on the backs of children.
Yeah.
But it is. Determining whether an adult who works incredibly hard, long hours makes a living wage based on whether a child can fill in a bubble on a Scantron sheet is appalling. It's appalling. But it's certainly a lot easier to use them and use those excuses than to say we have to pull back on a budget for tanks and missiles than to, make sure that people are paid a living wage and children don't go to school in a place with lead paint.
Right.
to conflate the many issues of public education.
No, but I think that's right at the heart of a lot of the problems with education, is that there, there's no problem that you can look at in isolation. You have to
Oh,
look at what the kids are eating, how much sleep they're getting, all these things. And they're trying there, I don't know who I'm talking about, government, um, lobbyists, maybe the creator of these tests. They're trying to simplify it to
yeah.
something that they can manage. So it sounds like an imperfect solution to a really hard problem.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
it's one somebody can make money on,
yeah, yeah.
making sure that kids have adequate nutrition is a way that you could make some money. You really could.
Mhm.
Um, but that's not the lobbyist the lobby that showed up with enough teeth and
Yeah.
cash.
What's it like being administrating in a school as opposed to teaching? What do you like it more or less? What's harder? What's easier?
Yeah. So that's a great question. I used to want to be a head of school
Mm,
until fairly recently, actually. Um, and then in my last school, I rose to a senior administrative position. Um, and I discovered I don't want that level of stress in my life. Um,
mm,
it is unseemly. That world is unseemly, and it suits some people just fine. But it is, the number of constituencies that you have to deal with and keep happy is magnified the higher up you go. I like kids. I like taking care of kids and making sure they have what they need. At I am at the point I want to go no higher than where I am right
mm,
now. Department head is a kind of leadership that I enjoy. Um, I get to make sure that smart teachers get what they need and are supported. Um, whether that's money, whether that's books. I have to have a fight today about books, which I'm really looking forward to. Um, whether it's classroom space, technology, crayons. Last year I spent like $2,000 in art supplies, which was a whole other issue. But like those teachers really care about their art supplies, and by God, they were going to have their crayons. Um, and then making sure that I'm in the right rooms so that
mm,
nobody takes away anything that they need or adds more to their plate without taking something away they don't need. I consider myself a servant leader. That's my leadership model. Um, and I take that very seriously. How can I make sure that these super capable, smart people, that nobody messes with them? I'm like, you know, kind of a mom in that way. Um, the other stuff I don't need, right? I don't need to have to tap dance in front of admissions, um, you know, at admissions fairs all the time and
mm,
tout the virtues of our program. I'm supposed to. I hate it. I hate it so
mm,
much. Um, but because I'd rather the work just speak for itself. I don't love the like how can we be innovative talk.
mm,
um I'm not trying to. I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. We just need to have a better understanding of how wheels work and then make sure that they actually run smoothly.
mm.
um you know can we grease the axle? Yes, yes we can.
Yeah,
Let's do
yeah,
that instead of trying to create something wholly new. I love being able to take that colleague's great piece about putting work on its feet with a small group and getting that out to other people and going, look what he did. Well, look what he
yeah.
found. This is amazing. Everybody should pay attention to what he's saying. That's my jam. And then making
What
sure,
other? Sorry.
no, just making sure that kids are happy and looked after. That's it.
Yeah, I'm curious. What other day-to-day practices do you think, or that you would like to see more schools implement in terms of greasing the wheels?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, um, I think the advantage that private schools of having small class sizes
Mm,
really matters, because it goes back to what I was saying before about the number one skill that teachers need to bring in is compassion. They need to pay attention to kids, care about kids. If you've got 40 of them, you just can't,
mm,
in one classroom at one time. And likewise, teachers can't be overtasked with too much. Um, when teachers are exhausted and pulled in too many different directions, they, as humans do, just stop caring about stuff that isn't immediately in front of them, right? And they're not as good, they're not as crisp, um, they're not as much fun to be around. They're not looking at the next new thing because they just don't have the time to make those changes and try out things. They don't have the bandwidth for risk taking, which learning requires.
mm,
Um, and so kids need to be in a place where they are seen and heard, and teachers need to be able to see and hear them because they have, the bandwidth, but they also have the scope of vision. And it's just, to me, those two things are most vital. You can teach excellent classes, do great work on a shoestring budget, um, but you can't do great work at that level with no resources, like no energy and no attention and too much to happening at one time. Um, as long as teachers are given the ability to function at a high level, meaning they are not overtasked and they are not overstressed and they don't have too much in human capital in their hands,
yeah.
they're gonna they're gonna do it. Um, I've watched some really novice teachers come up to a really high level just by having the time to learn and to develop and to watch their own progress and to make mistakes and recover from them. It doesn't happen in places where they're just trying to survive moment to moment.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, again, it's these intractable problems because public schools are still going to have 40 kids to a class, right? They're,
Yeah. So I watched a really dumb debate play out here in Oregon over the spring. And it was deeply appalling because what happened was, as I mentioned before, the number of students dropped in this particular school district,
mm,
um, which meant that the powers that be shrank the budget. You don't have as many kids, you don't need as much money. And the teachers at the school and their union said, whoa, 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 whoa. If we have fewer students in the building, if you keep our budget the same, we can have smaller class sizes. If we have smaller class sizes, we'll be more effective teachers. You won't even need to raise our salaries.
mm,
You give us the 2% raise that we were going to get anyway, but you don't have to pay us anymore, but we'll be better. When we have shrunken our class sizes from 30 to 16, 18, 20 even, we can do a better job. So don't take our money away, just get out of our way and let us
mm,
continue to find our level of excellence with this new paradigm. Um, they could not have been clearer about the benefits of just leaving the money where it was and letting them try this new system, right? Because up until then, they'd been kind of in a panic. Oh my God, where all the kids go? Oh my God, how do we get back to where we were? No,
and this is
we
due to
should.
COVID.
Yeah, a lot of families had moved out of the county, and some had moved out of the state, and so and again, like I said, the numbers dropped nationwide, and nobody's quite figured out what happened to those kids. but the the school board did not listen. The powers that be did not listen. And they did cut the budget, and they removed classes. And so those teachers that were left had to go back into those 30, 40 kid classrooms in a school that was now 25% fewer kids. That was so unnecessary. So, we're not talking about a solution necessarily, but when presented with an opportunity, even when it's simple, um, money wins, money talks, because they could take that money and put it someplace else, and they absolutely did it to the detriment of both the teachers and the kids.
Yeah. Okay. I have to go soon, but I don't want to end on the problems of academia. You were on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. I had no idea. I Google your name and not only that you were on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, but in season 12 hosted by Cedric the Entertainer. So what the hell, Josina?
I got to the $1 million question. I'm slightly
I know
those weirdo game show aficionados.
Do you have a whole wiki page dedicated to you? It's there's with every question, and yeah, it's impressive. How does one decide to go on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? How do you apply? What?
Yeah. So the decision came because at my 40th birthday party, my best friend, who was at the end of her maternity leave, was like, I have been home watching a lot of Millionaire during this maternity leave, and it's my favorite show. And they just announced that they were testing for the next season, so I'm gonna go and test. And I was like, ooh, that sounds like fun. Tell me more. And she's like, so yeah, you show up at this, like type in a registration form, and you go down to CBS in Manhattan, and you take a test. And if you do well on the test, then you go on to the next thing. So I did a registration form. And one of the things that happens when you register is they send you a questionnaire with like all these questions about yourself, fun facts and stories that you would tell. And, like, what would you say to Cedric the Entertainer if you got to meet him? And so I walked around for like a week with this questionnaire, just asking everybody at school what they would say. And it was a hoot. So I showed up for the test, which was a quiz with like 40 questions. And if you got a certain number right, then you went on and had a conversation with an associate producer. And I passed the quiz. So the associate producer asked a bunch of questions, both to sort of get more of a sense of how you handle trivia on the fly, like if you don't have it on paper and pencil, but also to get a sense of your personality. And so somebody had mentioned that to me in the line outside before we went in, like, you make sure you have your personality on, not just your thinking cap. And I was like, okay, I can do that. So we get in, and I have this conversation, and I answer the 3 trivia questions well. And apparently the associate producer liked me. So those people who made it through that round got a camera test with another producer. And you get 3 questions again, but now on camera. And they said, like, if this camera thing works out, then you get to, you'll find out within 3 weeks. So they asked me a question about the game Yahtzee, which I thought was so funny that I just burst into giggles, which made the producer giggle. And I think that was probably the thing that really got me over the hump. And so 3 weeks to the day, they called and they were like, I got a postcard that said you're in the pool. And I was like, I'm in the pool. Very excited. So then I went to vacation, and in a postcard said, in 3 weeks, you'll find out whether you've moved to a slot. And I was in New Hampshire, and it got this like voicemail that I couldn't hear because they don't have any cell service on there. And I was like, oh my god. So I called the number that had popped up on my caller ID, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we just need to see you down here. Bring two outfits, and you're going to come down, and you're going to spend all day, one day, but two outfits just in case." So I went and I got my hair done, and I got my two little outfits, and they said you can bring two guests to the taping. So my husband came and his best friend, and I spent an entire day and didn't get on camera. I was like, oh, and they said, it's entirely possible this will go over, and you may not even make it to camera. Just because you made it in the building doesn't mean this is guaranteed. So didn't make it on the camera, and they said, well, we liked your test, so come back this other day and we'll try. By that time, my hair was not doing as well. I was like,
you looked fantastic. I watched clips.
I was like, I'm not going back to the hairdos. But my husband couldn't come, so my dad came, and we met uptown, and he went and sat in the audience, and I finally made it on the camera, and it was such a gas. Like, it was surreal. Like, the lights and the cameras and Cedric the entertainer, who's so charming, and get all the way to the $1 million question. They took a break right before the $1 million question. The producer came over and was like, "Hey, I think you can get this. You should guess." And I was like, "Okay." Like, I'm so high on this whole experience. I'm like, I'm gonna guess. And I told myself, if I banked $100,000, then if I was slightly unsure, I was not going to take a risk. I was going to walk with $100,000, but I never banked $100,000.
Yeah.
So, I think, or like a 200, I think 250 was what I said. So I banked 100. That's what happened. I banked 100, but I didn't make the 250, and that was my cutoff. It was like 200, I walk. 250?
Yeah.
Are you kidding me? I walk. So because I'd only banked 100, I'm like, I made my resolution. Let's just give this a shot. And so
for a $900,000 upside.
Yeah.
It was like,
exactly.
Yeah.
So that's
and it was freaking Nostradamus's treatise.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I thought
jelly.
you reasoned it out. I think that was, digging graves was totally the most.
I thought so.
I thought it was a great guess. I love, first of all, Cedric the Entertainer. He's very charismatic. I think at one point he hits on you he's like, "Oh, what are you gonna do with the million?" You go, "Oh, okay, hammock, yacht," and he goes, "And do I get to be there?" And you just kind of
Yes.
It was good. It was good. Yeah. Wow, it's so yeah, it's such a iconic show. And I mean, I grew up watching all these like Price is Right, Jeopardy, Wheel of Fortune, and you always play the game at home and say, "Oh, wow, what if I was in that position?" And well, that's wild. I hate to ask, but was there any regret? I mean, you on the show at some point, Cedric asks you, he goes, "Oh," something to the effect of, how are you feeling?" And or he tried to goad you into making the moment more than it was. And you go, "I walked in here with a Metro card."
Yeah.
And I thought it was such a great line. What I mean, after that high, what was it like after you left the show?
So I took the subway home. I was living in Bay Ridge, and the studio was 106th and Park. So the train ride home was pretty long. And I was still sort of floating on the high, right? Like, I took home $25,000.
Yeah. You're on national TV, $25,000. It's not a bad afternoon.
40% of it in taxes, but it was still going to be a nice little chunk of change. But I got off the train and was walking back to my house, and as I got like the block around the corner from my house, the high wore off, and I was like, "Oh, Jesus!" I could have walked out of there with 100,000 or 60 grand after taxes.
Yeah,
60 grand would have been a really nice. It would have made a difference, and so the crash from that was pretty awful. I got in the house and I called my husband and I burst into tears. I was
Oh
like,
no.
oh, I don't believe I did that. The producer said I should guess. And I was just like, it's okay. You didn't have 60 grand when you started
Yeah,
the decade.
yeah,
It's okay that you don't have it now. Um,
yeah.
but it definitely, and then, when the episodes aired, the kids found out. And the
Yeah.
first, the first day they sort of watched them surreptitiously on their computers, watched the episode on their computers. But the second day, when they realized there was going to be a second day, entire classrooms put them up on their projector screens. So I had to go sit outside in the parking lot while the episode was playing all over campus because I knew how it ended. And I was so devastated that my entire
Uh,
student body, the Episcopal student body, and all of these faculty were watching me lose $1 million. I was like, oh my
well, you were what, one of two people up to that point that had gotten to the final question.
yeah, it was fun, and I'm glad that I did it, and I've certainly recovered from the loss, but it was a little bit hard.
All right, I think that's a podcast. That's a good place to end it. The conflicting incentives in American educational systems and Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. There's some like poetic justice there.